Okay, so ever since Sabrina Carpenter's new song Espresso came out, I've been completely obsessed. Oh, hello. Welcome back to my channel. I recorded the intro that you started to watch like 4 months ago when I had a day off work and I thought I could make 2 swimsuits in a day when I've never made a swimsuit before. Don't know why I thought that was gonna work out. But that was around the time Espresso came out and we were all obsessed with it, and now Sweet and Sour's come out and we're all obsessed with that. But guys, Espresso is still cool and we can still make the iconic Espresso music video swimsuits. So that's what we're gonna be doing today. And I'm going to be showing you how to make these for the low price of... I kept my receipt so I could tell you. What's 41 plus 16? So basically for like $30 each. And you know, of course I looked up the price of them just to see if I could just buy them. And they're like $200, $300. So you're gonna scream and deal if you follow this tutorial. So I hope you enjoy. So I am definitely not a professional artist, but I'm going to attempt to sketch these out so you can envision what I'm envisioning. Swimsuit 1 is going to be the little ruffle bikini number that she wears. I am going to make it into a one piece, but you can totally make it into a bikini. So it's going to be, again, forgive the drawing, something like this, and I'm just gonna make it be flat across there because the ruffle is gonna go here and then the ruffle's gonna go here. So I think the base can just be kind of flat and this will all be filled in, brown, whatever. So if you're just making the bikini, you just want to make it like a bandeau and you'll put your ruffle over that, and then you'll just make bottoms and put your ruffle on that. Pretty much the same process. And I also think I'm gonna add some straps. Don't know if they're gonna be like this or be like going behind the neck like that, so we'll just kind of see, but they'll be spaghetti-ish. And then swimsuit 2 is the adorable number she wears on the surfboard. So that one's got more of a kind of, I don't know what it's called, but that sort of neckline, and it definitely curves in a bit more, I would say, than the other one. It's probably more obvious because it's not a bikini. And it's got this fun, it's kind of, you know, and then it's got ruching across the whole swimsuit, and the ruching actually kind of goes down past, so we're gonna have to figure out how to do that. And then the straps are thick, and actually from the pictures I've seen, I think they go down into the side of the swimsuit, and they're kind of like this. Something, either they tie in the back or they just fully connect, so I'll have to do a little bit more research. But anyways, sorry, these are really bad drawings, but this is kind of what you can visualize we will be doing today. Yes, we should have gone to card. Why do we always do this? Colored is right. So let's just find, maybe we should just see if there's ones that are even cheaper. Well, that might be the cheapest. What about this? Because it's very fun, but it's sparkly.
Ooh, I like sparkles.
Or like not sparkly, but shimmery.
I like shimmers.
Shiny nylon spandex. I think this could work. Let's just keep it. What the freak is this? I literally needed this when I was trying to make my Barbie shoes. They had nothing like this here. I had to order it online. Stupid.
Wow. So we're the serious music over this, like you're a king and you're like making battle plans. It's like battle music.
I do really like the pink, but I feel like we should stay true to the source material. So let's just do the dark brown. And then if I love it, I'll just make it again in pink.
Amen, sister.
There we go. Final decision.
Beautiful.
Here's the thing. How much did I get? I got a yard. I'm just thinking I might only need half a yard of this. I theoretically only need like this much. 3/4 of a yard. I literally have no idea how much of this is taking.
Is this not the ruching we're talking about right now?
Well, yeah. Let's do this. A yard should be enough, right? Because we're gonna gather it. So I think a yard should be enough. Why are you? Stop following me. But yeah, we got up there and then we realized we had the wrong color fabric, so then we had to do it in two separate.
They have a mini version of the crystal sheet. Turn it back. Turn it back.
Step 1 is to cut the rough edge of the fabric off so it's all clean and ready to go. Then you're going to make a pattern which you should be able to use as the base for both swimsuits. Normally I would recommend using paper to make the pattern, but I didn't have any big enough, so I just used an old sheet, which totally works too. To make the pattern, trace the front and back of one of your favorite swimsuits. If you don't have a swimsuit, you will have to lay down and outline yourself. I'd recommend using a friend as it's quite difficult to outline yourself while laying down. Okay, so we've pinned her on the dress form, which this isn't actually dress form, but there was a department sale near my parents' house that was getting rid of everything. So I bought this mannequin to use as a dress form, and basically it barely overlaps if you pull it tight on here. And I think that should be fine because this fabric is not stretchy and our swimsuit fabric is stretchy. So you'll want it to be a little bit small anyways. And it's a little bit hard to tell on this guy just because the crotch area is not wide like a normal person, so it's hard to tell exactly how it's gonna lay, but it looks to me like there'll be good butt coverage, so I think it should be fine. And then the only other thing is clearly this is very high up and we want it to be more like coming right here. So I think we'll need to trim off some of that, but other than that, I think the pattern pieces should be pretty good. Adjust the pattern to your liking by pinning it on a dress form or yourself to check it. And then using your adjusted pattern, cut out the front and back lining pieces for your first swimsuit. So we are now on our way to the store because I realized you need special thread for sewing spandex type fabric or it doesn't hold well. So we're gonna go buy some thread, and unfortunately, I have a couple errands I have to run today, so that is gonna eat into our time, but don't worry guys, I still have faith we can get this done in 12 hours. First errand done. It was this pickup order for my dad's Father's Day present, and it's pretty hilarious. And I was dying because I didn't even think about it, but I'm like wearing a Star Wars shirt while I picked it up, so that was kind of funny. But errand 1, Father's Day present, done. I forgot to record this earlier, but the area you want to look for swimsuit fabric is athleisure. Also, a moment for my shoes because everybody hates them and I love them because they're the perfect summer sandal for doing anything. Okay, so we finished our next errand, bought all the thread, which these are just for another project that I'm working on, but these 3 are for our swimsuit project. They were having a sale and it was buy 3 get 3 free, so basically losing money if you don't get 6. But yeah, so we bought this. It's called eloflex, my bad, which, sorry, it's backwards so you won't be able to see it, but it's supposed to be really good for swimsuits because it's made for stretchy fabric, and like even if you just feel it, it feels thicker and almost waterproof. So I just feel like it's gonna be better than the other thread because it's thicker and more sturdy, so it's less likely to wear down from the chlorine. It is a little bit more pricey, so if you want to just go with regular polyester you could, but I feel like this is the move.
All right, break time. All right, break time's over. Chop, chop.
Now that your break is over, you're going to pin the lining together, trimming off the edges as needed so that everything lines up. And I feel like this is a good moment to point out that the swimsuits are actually kind of tricky because the fabric is so stretchy. It's definitely a delicate mix between making it tight enough that it's not going to fall off, but giving it enough stretch that it's easy to get on and off. So if you can afford, I highly recommend getting enough fabric that you can make a mock-up with the lining and then adjust as needed from there. That's kind of what I did at this stage, but I only had enough fabric for the 2 swimsuits, so I couldn't really afford to mess it up too badly. Once the back and front lining are pinned together, you're going to sew along the sides and the bottom so it looks like a swimsuit. You're then going to try it on and adjust as needed until it fits you like a glove, but a stretchy glove. Also, normally when making a swimsuit, you would want to cut all of the pieces out and sew the lining and the top of the swimsuit together so there is one seam on the inside that you can serge off, but I don't have a serger, so this is an alternate method so there isn't an annoying raw edge touching your skin. Oh, and once you're done adjusting, make sure to cut off the extra fabric so it's not super bulky on the inside. Alrighty, now that your lining is ready to go, you're actually going to use that to trace out the brown fabric. Also, I forgot to mention we're starting with that one if that wasn't already clear. And while you're tracing, make sure to add a little bit of room to the outline for seam allowance. You're then going to repeat the same steps you did for the lining, sew along the sides and the bottom. I recommend a straight stitch for the sides and the bottom, but FYI, after all that talk about how the elasticy thread was going to work super well, it was super hard to work with. It could have been my needle or maybe my machine settings or also just the slippery nature of the fabric, but I had a lot of trouble getting it to not skip stitches, so I had to go over everything multiple times, which didn't help with the stretch of the swimsuit. If anyone has recommendations on the best sewing machine settings and needle to use for that kind of thread, please drop them in the comments and help us all. Once the brown is sewn together, you're going to again trim off any excess fabric, and then you are ready to marry lining with non-lining. Outer fabric? Whatever you want to call it. You're going to want to pin them together carefully, making sure the tiny bit of excess fabric from both seams lays flat on the inside. Normally I would recommend ironing the fabric flat along the seam, but this fabric doesn't really iron, so you will have to just smooth it all down by hand as best you can. You will then do a zigzag stitch along the sides to anchor the fabric together. You could do a straight stitch, but then you need to do one on either side of the original seam, otherwise the fabric won't be anchored enough and your swimsuit will likely rip apart if you try to swim in it. If you're not going to swim in it, then it could be fine. You're then going to hem the leg holes by flipping the fabric under to finish and sewing another zigzag stitch around the leg holes. I did attempt to fold it under twice, but it's too slippery and it gets too thick, so you're just going to have to deal with that edge being a bit raw. Unless of course you have a serger. I should really get one of those. Oh, and pro tip, I would recommend trying the swimsuit on one more time before you hem the leg holes because I did not, and when I finished there was way too much fabric down in the lower parts, so I had to unpick it and adjust, which was quite a painful process, literally because I think I stabbed myself multiple times while unpicking. To avoid this, you could also try using your favorite pair of underwear to measure the bottom part of the swimsuit, but it's just tricky to adjust the seam allowance, so it will probably take some trial and error no matter what you do. Okay, now it's time for the ruffles. I went back and forth on how thick to make them, but I settled on the length of a baby shoe. If you don't have a baby shoe, I'd recommend borrowing one from the nearest baby, or maybe just measuring them to whatever length feels good to you.
Well, it is midnight, or close to midnight, which is later than I should be going to bed anyways. But we did not finish either of the swimsuits. So that is sad. But I mean, I did take a break for dinner and for a movie night with some friends. So probably if I didn't do that, I could have gotten at least one of them done, but my back was hurting and I needed a break. So it's okay. A little bit of a failed experiment, but we did make a lot of progress. I think I probably would have been able to finish faster too if I had better pattern pieces, because once I put everything together and tried it on, I was measuring throughout to make sure it fit, but it's just kind of hard until you put it together in the final state to make sure that it's actually fits right. So I just had to do some unpicking and adjusting, but luckily we should be able to use that as a basis for the next swimsuit once I finish that one. So anyways, it should help and make it easier to do the other one. But yeah, so I guess I'll be continuing to work on it this week and finishing it up hopefully by the weekend, but we'll see.
Yeah, it took a lot longer than just the weekend, but that's okay. So you're going to need a lot of fabric for the ruffles, probably more than you think, and oh, actually we're going to make the swimsuit straps right now and we'll get back to the ruffles later. So cut out a long skinny piece of fabric, however long you want your strap to be, and then sew along the edge of it and turn it inside out. Because this fabric is super stretchy, you shouldn't have any issues turning it inside out, but if you do, that means you need to make the strap a little wider. Once it's flipped inside out, you're going to hem the edge by flipping it under and sewing a line across, but you only need to do this if your straps are going to be a tie behind your neck. So that you have two straps, you're going to do that whole process twice. Okay, so now that our straps are done, we're going to figure out exactly where in the swimsuit they need to go. I'm guessing it'll be around here, but I'm going to look at my other swimsuits to kind of figure that out. And I'm thinking of having it just kind of be like ties that go behind the neck, but you know, it could also just be like straight up straps that go over, so we'll see. Like I said, helpful to use another swimsuit that has similar straps to figure out where to place them. You can also just try the swimsuit on and pin them in different places until you like how it looks. You will then sew the straps to the top of the swimsuit, and you will notice the top of the swimsuit has not been hemmed yet. So what you're going to do is fold the top of the swimsuit down like you did for the leg holes, and then you're going to pin the straps on top of the folded over fabric. So when you hem the top of the swimsuits, the straps will get sewn in too. Also, you will see that after I sewed the straps in, I realized I needed to sew along the sides to anchor the strap hem in place because it started to unravel. Like I mentioned, the sides of your swimsuit would do if you didn't anchor them in place. So I recommend doing that step before you sew them into the swimsuit. I did do 2 straight stitches along the sides so that the original hem was in the middle, but you could also do a zigzag stitch like we did for the side of the swimsuit if you prefer the look of that. And now back to the ruffles. As you can see, when you fold the ruffles in place, the strip of baby shoe sized fabric you cut becomes super tiny, more tiny than I thought it was going to get. So I ended up having to sew strips of fabric together to make the ruffle long enough to fit around the top of the swimsuit, which was fine, but it requires some tricky folding to try and hide the hem underneath so it's not visible on the outside. And that brings me to the point of I totally gave up trying to make the folds perfectly even. I ended up having to refold the fabric so many times it was not worth measuring, so I just eyeballed them, but if you really want them to be perfectly even, you can measure each one as you clip it in place. Also, I'm not even going to try to explain how to actually fold the ruffles because I don't know how to explain with words, so for those who are not visual learners, I apologize. And at this point too, you're noticing I'm using the clips. Highly recommend that because using sewing pins for this process would be super painful and also much more likelihood that you're going to snag the fabric. Once the ruffle is all clipped in place and long enough to go around the whole top of the swimsuit, you're going to pin it evenly to the top of the swimsuit and sew it in place. I sewed a line through the middle of the ruffle and I did go around twice to make sure the ruffles were anchored very well. Also, I did not do this for the top ruffle, but I did for the bottom ruffle. Totally recommend sewing the line down the middle of the ruffle before you attach it to the swimsuit so that you don't have to worry about the ruffles coming undone. And then you can take off the clips before you sew it to the top of the swimsuit because honestly they get super annoying to deal with. And while I was sewing the ruffle on, my needle broke and I thought I didn't have any more that would work for sewing slippery fabric, so I had to go to the store. This is my 3rd time coming this week because I literally forgot I ran out of bobbins. Awkward. Yo, we need one of these.
Sewing notions. Be in sewing notions.
Oh yeah, look, here's some. Okay, perfect. Oh yeah, maybe I should buy a better needle.
Buy 2 get 1
on
free,
here.
Andrea.
What?
Buy 2 get 1 free.
To any things. Ooh, should I get a bobbin holder?
Mom needs one of those.
Bobbin box? Oh. Mom, is it better to get metal bobbins?
Yeah.
Well, what is the difference?
They look cooler.
Last longer if they don't break, snap like plastic.
Wait,
Oh.
but this says a case of 15, and then it says 12 pieces.
They're lying to
does
you.
this. I don't actually think I need to buy a different.
Quilting, jeans. See, the jeans ones will be thicker.
They say 90-14. So that's what I was using. So I don't need
Oh, we gotta lock in, Andrea.
Run.
Have less than 9 minutes.
Buy 2 get 1 free. So do you want something free?
Let's get one of these things. A rolling tote and sewing basket. You need one of those, Mom.
Oh, I don't know. Do you want a bobbin holder?
I know you're probably on the edge of your seats wondering what I decided to get for free. It was another set of bobbins. Now that you have plenty of bobbins and a new needle, you're ready to get back to sewing. And at this point, I realized there was a bit of an issue with the ruffle. Okay, so basically what happened is when I finished this, it looked super good, but, and it's gonna be kind of super obvious with the clips, but like when you hold this thing up, the top ruffle just flops over. Obviously it's worse because of the clips right now. Because of that, we need to tack all of these down to make sure that they stay. So basically I have clipped the fold in place so that we don't undo the fold on accident. And then we're just gonna put a little stitch on the inside there so that it stays up and it's kind of attached to the back. It might be kind of a pain, but it's gonna look really cute when we're done, so it is totally worth it. If you want to avoid this problem, what you really need is to just buy thicker fabric. Like if you made this out of scuba fabric and you did these ruffles, it would definitely hold its shape because that fabric is much thicker, but you know, they don't make scuba fabric in a lot of different colors unless you like custom order it. So I just liked this fabric because it's much prettier, but yeah, it is gonna be a little bit more time intensive to create the look. Like I said, a wee bit time intensive, but I did go through and tack down the sides of each ruffle by sewing a small line up and down a couple of times, as close to the center of the inside of the ruffle as possible, so that the stitch would be hidden. This did secure all the ruffles in place, and pro tip for this, don't feel like you have to cut the thread in between each tack. You can actually just sew your line and then pull the thread a bit loose and move to the next section. This makes it a little bit faster because it's less stop and start, and you can just cut all the loose threads off after, like I'm showing you so clearly here. Once I was done with this, I tried the swimsuit on and realized I did not like having it tied behind my neck, so I had my lovely husband help me position the straps in place in a crisscross at the back so I could sew the straps down permanently. I did have to trim them a bit from the length I originally hemmed, and then it was nice with the ruffles already sewn on because they created a bit of a channel that I could tuck the strap into. But if you end up going this route, make sure when you sew the straps on, you don't sew over the ruffles. You'll need to pull the ruffle down and just sew the strap to the base swimsuit so there isn't a line going across the ruffle on the outside. Okay, so as you can see, the ruffle is done. The little strappy crisscross on the back is done. And then we were, of course, going to put a ruffle all the way around the hips to mimic Sabrina Carpenter's. Basically, the first problem was I don't have enough fabric left to make a ruffle this thick going all the way around. I could just go buy more fabric, but I kind of don't want to. So because of that, went through a couple different options of either doing like a smaller ruffle along here, just leaving it like this, or doing some hip ruffles. Honestly, my favorite is just doing like the little hip ruffles. I feel like it works better with the one piece anyways, because the whole ruffle kind of, I don't know, looks kind of strange. So I feel like this is gonna be cute. So what we're going to do is figure out basically how far do we want it to go from the hip. So what I'm thinking is about on the, like basically if you're thinking about your thigh, like halfway, 5 inches basically on both sides because we want it to be even. So we basically need 10 inches of ruffles for both sides. I'm gonna see if I have enough fabric for that, but yeah, give it a try. Once I decided on going with the hip ruffles, I cut the rest of the fabric to be the right length and folded the ruffles. Luckily, I did end up having enough fabric to do a 5-inch ruffle on each side, but it did take a bit of piecing together because I had one big piece and then some smaller ruffle sections, but I just sewed the smaller sections together, making sure like we did for the top ruffle that the connecting seam was hidden at the back of the ruffle. And if you're wondering what that fork was about, I saw this hack on Instagram where you use a fork to make even pleats, and I thought it might work for this, but it didn't because these ruffles aren't exactly like pleats since they have to be folded on either side, whereas pleats are just one fold over and over again, but I digress. You'll see, like I mentioned before, I sewed the ruffles in place down the center before attaching them to the swimsuit, and I won't lie, it was a bit tricky to get them evenly placed on the swimsuit, but I tried it on myself and then measured as best I could to get them evenly spaced. You'll definitely want to try on the swimsuit at this point because you'll want to make sure the ruffles are placed as high or low as you want them before you sew them on. I did them slightly above the bottom of the swimsuit so that they weren't hanging way below my hip, but you should place them wherever makes you happiest. So I literally thought I videoed sewing the ruffles on the bottom, but I didn't turn my camera on. So anyways, to attach the bottom, after you've pinned it, you're gonna sew a line following the line you already sewed to keep the ruffle together. And then you'll do that on both sides. And unfortunately, I tried it on and these do completely flop over. So if you want them to stay up, you are gonna have to tack them like we did with the other ones. And here's a montage of me tacking the bottom ruffles down. Woohoo! Yeah, it was definitely my least favorite part. So I highly recommend finding scuba fabric if you can, since that would solve this issue. And to be honest, if you make the swimsuit black, you could probably find normal black spandex for the bodysuit and then just make the ruffles out of the scuba fabric if you want the swimsuit to not be as thick. And on to swimsuit 2. So you're going to repeat the same steps to create the lining, and you'll see me making modifications because if you recall, the brown swimsuit had too much fabric at the bottom, so I tried to avoid having to redo it again. And I was planning to make this swimsuit double layered as well, but I realized at this point I did not have enough fabric to do that, and as previously established, I'd already been to Joann's 3 times this week, and I really did not want to go again. So what I ended up doing is cutting 2 underwear sized pieces for the bottom so that it was double layered, and then I cut a bandeau sized piece to go across my boob area so it would be double layered there as well. I mostly wanted these extra layers because the lining fabric is pretty see-through, but if you had a darker base fabric, you could be totally fine doing a single layer. You can also just make sure you buy enough fabric to begin with instead of eyeballing it before making your pattern. Once all the lining pieces were cut, I cut out the mesh that we're going to gather, and I recommend measuring from top to hip of your lining and then doing twice that length so you have plenty of gather. You could probably get away with 1.5 of the length, but you can always trim the excess later if needed, so go with the extra if you can. Once your mesh rectangle is cut, you're going to sew a gather stitch down both sides and gather them. Do this for the front and the back. Okay, so what we're trying to do here is we're looking at a model of the swimsuit in a different color because the color Sabrina wore is in fact sold out. So this is going to be our back. This is what the back of the swimsuit looks like, so I'm trying to decide if this is gathered enough to mimic this, but I feel like it is. I think it looks pretty good, so I'm just gonna try and even it out a little bit more because it's still not quite even, but I feel like we got a decent gather, so we're just gonna do that again for the front. But I mean, you can see this is, even though it looks brown, this is black mesh. It's just because of the color underneath, which I do feel like ours is gonna look a little bit like this looks brown. I feel like because the underneath is more of a tan color than ours, but I mean, it's decently close. But let's look at the back of the red. Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's as good as it's gonna get. I also feel like this looks way squattier, but it is like the right length, so it should be fine. And then you can kind of see the bottom part is like the lining is covered in the mesh, and then it's just probably comes up somewhere along here, probably right there, because I feel like this piece is very dark and then it gets more see-through. So that's kind of what we're going to be mimicking with ours. Apologies for the close-up on the models behind, but it was necessary for you to grasp the concept. And let's be real, she had a nice butt. Okay, so like I said, the bottom is lined with a layer of mesh, so we're going to use our underwear-shaped lining piece to cut out the mesh piece. Okay, so for the neck of this swimsuit, since it's not going to be adjustable, you're going to want to measure around your neck. Try the base of the lining. Try the lining of the swimsuit on, and then basically measure with a tape measure how long you want the neck strap to be from where the lining starts, and that's how long you're going to cut your strap to sew on, but also leave some seam allowance. After you've figured out how long you want your strap to be, you're going to cut out a rectangle of mesh and a rectangle of lining to become the strap. Make sure it is twice the width you want the end strap to be plus seam allowance. I think I made mine like 4 inches thick, and you will notice I didn't actually have a piece of lining fabric that was long enough, so I cut 2 shorter pieces and sewed them together, which works fine because the seam is behind my neck and it's covered in the mesh, so it's not super visible. Once both pieces are cut, you're going to sew the mesh rectangle on top of the lining rectangle, and then you are going to serge the sides together, wrong sides out. And you may be thinking, what? I thought you didn't have a serger. Well, luckily my mother came to town and brought me her serger so I could borrow it to finish the swimsuit. You can definitely make it without serging, but I will say the mesh is quite a pain to deal with and the serger definitely helps. Once it's serged, you're going to turn it inside out and ta-da, you have your strap. Okay, so when you're done sewing the back strap, you can see like this is where we sewed the 2 nude pieces together, and then on the inside, it's serged together. But then when you flip it inside out, it's all nice. And on the inside, you can see the serge coming through a little bit. So you do want to, when you're serging, try not to cross where you initially stitch them together. Or if you do, when you're done, just do another stitch on the outside so that the serging line isn't showing through. The good thing with this is like you can see the fabric kind of like pulls together so you can't really see it. And also this hem is going to be underneath, so what you're actually going to see on top is just like the plain strap. So it's not a big deal, but just for reference, when you are serging things, that's a good thing to remember. At this point, you are ready to sew all your swimsuit pieces together. So you're going to pin them all in place, starting with the smaller lining pieces, then the full lining, then the mesh pieces. And you will see why we finished the strap before sewing the body together. Okay, so I want to show you before we sew all of these together because I'm a little bit scared to do the next part because I've never worked with mesh on the stretchy fabric before, so hopefully it goes well. So we're just sewing them together so that they stay in place when we're serging, because if you don't do that and you just try and straight up go to the serger, it's going to be a nightmare. So as you can see, we've pinned all the layers together, so then we're just going to sew along the edge all the way down so that all of these panels are stuck together. And you don't need to add the strap at this point, even though it is going to go on top of the front, because we'll just add that later because we need to measure the like how long it's going to be. So but I wanted to show you both sides because on the inside of this I've pinned the lining for the boob area, lining for your bottoms, and then on the other side we've pinned the mesh that's covering the bottoms and then the gathered mesh. And you might be asking like, oh, why didn't you just cut this to fit this perfectly? You can try to do that, but I think this is nice because with the gathering being out there, it's a little bit easier to finesse it when you're sewing along, whereas if you're trying to sew this exactly in there, this is the most bunchy part, so it's just gonna make your area right here a little like super thick. So this kind of helps it stay smoother when you're sewing. And also pro tip, since this is going to be open, I would recommend folding it under. It's not a big deal if you don't, but I just think that gives you a little bit of a cleaner edge. You don't need to worry about folding the top over because ultimately we're going to serge along here and then flip it under. So it's going to be covered, but I would recommend folding it under on the bottoms. And yeah, wish me luck. Okay, you're gonna see a lot of other fabric in here because I'm gonna put this earlier in the tutorial, but what you want to do basically before you get to all these steps, I didn't think it was gonna be necessary because I don't know why. Well, yeah, basically if you buy enough fabric so that you can do the 2 layers of lining, you don't need to worry about this. You'll just put down the 2 layers and sew them together like normal. If you run into the issue of you don't have enough, so you're just doing a double layer on the bottom, then make sure before you sew all the pieces together that you sew this to the lining. I didn't want to because I was like, oh, there's going to be a seam showing through the mesh, but the issue is when you put the swimsuit on, it like kind of rolls and gets stuck, so you really do need it secured in place so that it fits well when you put the swimsuit on. Make sure you do that. You can also sew along these edges too to just basically anchor the bottom in place, and then you can add all the mesh layers in. Oh, and just a note, you don't need to sew along the bottom of the boob area lining because that naturally lays flat when you put the swimsuit on due to gravity. But if you wanted to sew padding into the swimsuit, you could place pads inside and sew along the bottom to secure them in place. Okay, so I started with the back because I figured, you know, if you mess up the back, it's just the back. But you guys, it totally worked. If you flip it over, you can see it looks so cute and bunchy. And this is the other nice thing about not cutting it exactly to the width of the lining, because if you do that, then you don't get any of this like nice draping. One second. I'm hoping that I'm mostly in frame. Okay, but you see now, because we made it a little bit looser, you really get this nice draped look. So if you do it super tight and it's the exact same size as the lining, it's gonna be stretched more like directly across, which honestly, that might be a little bit closer to what the actual swimsuit looks like. But I really enjoy this drapey look because I feel like when swimsuits get wet, they tend to like drape anyways. So it just kind of adds to the effect instead of it turning gross when you get wet. But it's totally personal preference, so if you don't like the drapey look, pull it tighter. And the other thing too is we may lose some of that when we sew them together, like both sides together anyways, so I feel like it's better to start off loose and then go tight versus starting off tight and then it being too tight at the end. So anyways, So since the back was successful, I went ahead and sewed the front pieces together. Unfortunately, it was not as successful as I thought because once the two pieces were sewn together, the swimsuit was super tight. I'm not exactly sure what happened because the lining had a lot of stretch and the mesh had a lot of stretch, but the mesh ended up getting pulled super tight on my body when I put the swimsuit on. So leave a lot of drapiness, more than you think you need, because it's going to be tighter than you think when you put it on. Once your sides are sewn together, it's time to pin the strap in place, and it's going to go between the front and back pieces. If you look at the swimsuit on Sabrina, you can see it looks like it's coming out of the seam at an angle. I forgot to mention also that we're sewing the front and back together before serging, so that's why we're pinning the strap in now. I just want to point something out because I almost made this mistake. When you pin these straps in, you're going to want to make sure that this corner lines up with the edge seam on this side, because you're going to want it to be seamless with that side. And then you're going to want to make sure this part is sticking out a little bit because you don't want it to be on the wrong side of this. So just to be safe, make sure it's completely out so that when you sew along it, there's not going to be like a little bit sticking on the inside. And theoretically, that will end us with some nice looking sleeves. And then you will have to probably tack this in place if you want this to stay flat against the swimsuit. So we'll tackle that later, but it looks like that's how they did it in the picture. And then you're just going to follow the line you already sewed from the top of the swimsuit to the bottom on both of the sides. You don't need to go over the bottoms again. And as you can see, you should be using a straight stitch for all of this sewing. This is when I put the swimsuit on and realized I was having the issue of the bottom lining pieces rolling like I talked about earlier in the video, so I had to unpick the sides, sew the lining pieces together, and then sew the mesh parts back together. This is a great time to point out the importance of trying on the clothes you sew at every stage before doing something permanent like serging, because you can always unpick and modify, but once you have cut the fabric like a serger does, there is no going back, so always keep that in mind. I did eventually serge the two sides together once I was happy with the fit, or so I thought, because I literally don't know how it went from fitting to being super tight, but maybe it was the serging. I don't know why that would have made a difference though, so I still recommend serging the sides. You will also serge along the bottom of the swimsuit and along the top so that we don't have any raw edges for when we hem the top and bottom. And ideally you would use serger thread that is the color of your swimsuit, but I forgot to tell me mom what color I needed, so she only brought white. It doesn't matter too much because it's on the inside of the swimsuit, but if you want it to be all matchy-matchy, you should match the serger thread. To hem the bottom of the swimsuit, you're going to flip the serged edge inside and then zigzag stitch along both bottom holes. When you're doing this, make sure that you don't zigzag over the mesh on the sides. I may have forgotten to mention earlier that you don't want the very bottom of the mesh to be sewn into the side hem because you want to be able to pull it down past the hip of your suit to make it more dress-like, if you're wanting to make it look like Sabrina's. If you don't care about the dress feel, then you can just sew it into the sides and the bottom like normal. And if that's confusing, I'm sorry, because to be honest, this swimsuit was way more complicated to make than I thought, so I'm doing my best here. And last but not least, before we can hem the top of the swimsuit, we need to add the elastic that's going to create the cute ruching between your boobies. So you're going to mark the middle of the top of the front of your swimsuit, and then you're going to fold the top of the swimsuit over the elastic so it's anchored in place when you hem the top of the swimsuit. To hem the top, you're again going to do a zigzag stitch. Before you finish the elastic part, you're going to want to tack down the straps if you want them to lay flat across the swimsuit, and you'll want to do this before the elastic is finished because it will help anchor the gathering in place. Also, I forgot to explain this earlier, but tacking just means doing a really tiny, almost invisible stitch to hold something in place. For these straps, I'm doing it by hand since it's such a small area, but as you saw earlier, you can also do it with your machine. For adding the elastic, number one, make sure you put it in before you hem the top so that it's nice and tucked in. And then you're gonna wanna pin it about where the strap ends on the swimsuit, but you're gonna wanna pull it tight so that when, I don't know the best way to explain this, but basically you're gonna pin it so that this fabric is bunching, and then when you're sewing it, you're gonna stretch it out so that the fabric is flat, and then when you're done, it'll make it nice and scrunched. Use a straight stitch for this and make sure that the gather is laying how you want it, because I didn't check the first time I sewed the elastic and all the gather was bunched at the top and nothing at the bottom, so it looked really silly and I had to redo it.